The early morning sun cast long shadows across Sarah Bennett's front porch as she stepped out into the crisp spring air of 1963. Her usual morning routine, checking the mail before heading to teach at Winchester High School, felt different today. Perhaps it was the way the morning light caught the brass mailbox, making it gleam like a beacon, or maybe it was the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for the stack of letters. Sarah adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, her fingers brushing against the pearl necklace her mother had given her when she earned her teaching degree. The stack of mail was ordinary enough. A few bills, a letter from her sister in Atlanta. And then, her breath caught. An official-looking envelope bearing the seal of the Birmingham Municipal Court. Inside her modest but immaculately kept home, Sarah sank into her favorite armchair, the one positioned perfectly beneath the window where she spent countless evenings grading papers. The morning light illuminated the dozens of academic certificates and student achievement awards adorning her walls. Each one told a story of triumph, of barriers broken, of young minds soaring beyond imposed limitations. Her hands, steady enough to write precise chemical formulas on chalkboards and guide nervous students through complex mathematics, trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. The formal language of the summons seemed to leap off the page. "You are hereby commanded to appear before the Honorable Judge William Morton." The grandfather clock in her hallway, a family heirloom that had kept time through 3 generations of educators, ticked away the seconds as Sarah read and reread the document. They were calling her to testify about her teaching methods, about the unprecedented success of her students in national competitions, about the growing number of her graduates receiving university acceptance letters. Just last week, Mary Thompson, her brightest student, had clutched an acceptance letter from an Ivy League university, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Miss Bennett," Mary had whispered, "they said my science project was one of the best they'd ever seen." That project, a groundbreaking study on local water quality, now sat proudly displayed in the school's trophy case, alongside debate team victories and mathematics Olympiad medals. Sarah stood, walking to her bedroom mirror. Her reflection showed a woman of 35, her dark skin glowing with vitality, her posture straight and proud despite the weight now settling on her shoulders. Her mother's words echoed in her memory. "Education is not just about books, Sarah. It's about teaching children to stand tall, to think deeply, to question wisely." The sound of a car horn outside broke through her reverie. Her carpool ride, fellow teacher Rebecca Johnson, was right on time, as always. Sarah gathered her teaching materials, including the college recommendation letters she'd stayed up late writing. Her students' futures were bright with possibility, and she had helped light the way. As she locked her front door, the court summons tucked securely in her purse, Sarah noticed her prized rose bushes were beginning to bloom. Despite the uncertainty churning in her stomach, she smiled. Like those roses pushing through the soil towards sunlight, her students were blooming too, reaching heights that many had claimed impossible. The court could question her methods, but they couldn't question the results, the transformed lives, the broadened horizons, the shattered expectations. Sliding into Rebecca's car, Sarah held her head high. Whatever lay ahead in that courtroom, she would face it with the same dignity and determination she worked to instill in her students every day. The price of progress had always been steep, but the rewards, watching young minds blossom and dreams take flight, made every challenge worthwhile. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in Sarah's classroom as evening settled over Birmingham. The familiar scent of chalk dust and fresh pencil shavings filled the air as she graded the last of her advanced chemistry papers. Her red pen paused over Janet Miller's elegant solution to a particularly challenging problem. The girl had such a gift for molecular structures. A gentle knock at the door drew her attention. Dr. Eleanor Wright stood in the doorway, her silver hair catching the light, her presence as commanding as it had been 20 years ago, when she'd first encouraged Sarah to pursue teaching. Now the retired principal of Winchester High School, Eleanor had become more than a mentor. She was Sarah's beacon of wisdom in troubled times. "I heard about the summons," Eleanor said, placing her worn leather bag on a nearby desk. She pulled out a thermos and 2 cups. The aromatic steam of Earl Grey tea curled between them as she poured. "Principal Thompson called me this afternoon." Sarah accepted the cup gratefully, watching the steam rise. "My students' test scores have attracted attention. Not all of it welcome, it seems." She gestured to the wall where newspaper clippings celebrated their achievements. Local students break state science fair records. Winchester High debate team sweeps regional championships. Eleanor settled into a student desk, something she'd done countless times during their evening discussions. "Sarah, do you remember what I told you your first year teaching? About the difference between teaching facts and teaching truth. Facts fill the mind," Sarah quoted, "but truth fills the soul." She smiled at the memory, then grew serious. "They want me to testify about my teaching methods, about why our students are excelling beyond expectations." The last word carried a weight they both understood. Eleanor's eyes, sharp despite her years, fixed on Sarah. "You've done nothing wrong. You've simply shown these children their own capabilities. Help them see past artificial limitations." She paused, sipping her tea. "But that frightens some people." Sarah stood, walking to the window. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, casting long shadows across the school's courtyard, where her students gathered during lunch breaks, discussing dreams that grew bigger with each passing day. "Mary Thompson received her acceptance letter last week," Sarah said softly. "Yale University, full scholarship. When she told her parents, her father cried. Said he never imagined." She trailed off, emotion catching in her throat. "And that's precisely why they called you in," Eleanor said, her voice firm but gentle. "Success raises questions. Excellence demands explanation. The old guard feels threatened by progress they can't control." Sarah turned back to her mentor, determination settling over her features. "My students deserve every opportunity to shine, every chance to prove their brilliance." "Then you know what you must do." Eleanor stood, gathering their empty cups. "Whatever choice you make tomorrow, make it for them. Make it for every child who will come after them." The weight of the decision settled around Sarah's shoulders like a familiar cloak. She thought of her students' faces, Mary's brilliance in chemistry, James's gift for mathematics, Patricia's eloquent essays, each one carrying dreams bigger than the world wanted to allow. "I won't betray their trust," Sarah said finally, her voice steady, "or their potential." Eleanor smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "Then you've already made your choice." She gathered her things, pausing at the door. "Remember, Sarah, silence can speak louder than words. Sometimes the most powerful testimony is the one we choose not to give." As Eleanor's footsteps faded down the hallway, Sarah returned to her grading, each mark of her red pen an affirmation of her resolve. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, in this classroom where dreams took flight, she was exactly where she needed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The morning sun streamed through the towering windows of Birmingham's courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. Sarah Bennett's heels echoed through the grand corridor, each step measured and purposeful. She had chosen her best dress for today, navy blue with small pearl buttons, pressed crisp and perfect the night before. The joy of that morning's celebration still lingered in her heart, a shield against the gravity of what lay ahead. Just 2 hours ago, she'd stood in her classroom watching Mary Thompson open yet another letter, this one confirming her research scholarship. The young girl's hands had trembled as she read aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. The other students had gathered around, their faces glowing with shared triumph and possibilities newly imagined. As Sarah approached the imposing courtroom doors, she caught her reflection in a nearby window. Her mother's pearls graced her neck, and her father's favorite scripture, memorized long ago, echoed in her mind. "Be strong and courageous." The familiar words steadied her racing heart. Outside the courtroom, she found familiar faces. 3 of her fellow teachers stood waiting: Rebecca Johnson, James Parker, and Luis Martinez. They formed a small circle around her, their presence a quiet affirmation of solidarity. "We came to witness," Rebecca said simply, squeezing Sarah's hand. "Whatever happens in there, you're not alone." James Parker, who taught history down the hall from her classroom, cleared his throat. "My students are still talking about your chemistry demonstration last week, the one about molecular bonds." His eyes crinkled with understanding. "Some bonds, they're learning, can't be broken by external forces." The heavy doors groaned open, and a court officer appeared. "Miss Bennett." His voice echoed in the marble hallway. "Judge Morton is ready." Sarah straightened her spine, feeling the weight of her students' dreams, their trust, their potential resting on her shoulders. She thought of the science fair projects proudly displayed in her classroom, each one representing countless hours of dedication. Of Patricia Williams, who had discovered a passion for biochemistry and now dreamed of medical school. Of James Turner, whose mathematical proofs had astonished university professors. As she stepped into the courtroom, the morning light streaming through tall windows illuminated the space in patches of gold and shadow. Judge William Morton sat elevated at his bench, his reputation for harsh rulings preceding him like a cold wind. Yet Sarah felt a curious calm settle over her, the same calm she felt while guiding students through difficult concepts, watching understanding dawn in their eyes. The gallery was divided, as custom dictated, but Sarah noticed something remarkable. Scattered throughout were faces she recognized, parents of her students, local business owners, even a few former pupils who had gone on to college. They sat quietly, their presence speaking volumes. "Miss Sarah Bennett," the clerk announced, his voice carrying across the hushed room. As she moved forward to take her place, Sarah caught sight of a small figure at the back of the courtroom. Mary Thompson had slipped in, still wearing her school uniform, clutching her scholarship letter like a talisman. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Sarah felt her resolve crystallize. She took her seat at the defendant's table, arranging her skirt with deliberate care. The polished wood beneath her fingers reminded her of her classroom desk, where just yesterday she guided another student through a complex equation, watching pride bloom on his face as understanding dawned. Judge Morton peered down from his bench, his expression stern and expectant, but Sarah sat perfectly straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had spent years teaching her students that dignity was not granted but claimed, that excellence was not a gift but a choice. Now was her moment to demonstrate those very lessons. The courtroom air grew thick with tension as Sarah Bennett took her oath, her voice clear and steady. Judge Morton's chambers fell so silent that the gentle whir of the ceiling fans seemed thunderous. Morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting her shadow long across the wooden floor. "Miss Bennett," Judge Morton began, shuffling through papers on his bench, "you've achieved quite remarkable results at Winchester High School." His tone carried an edge beneath its surface politeness. "Your students have won numerous academic competitions. They're receiving prestigious university acceptances. How do you explain these unusual successes?" Sarah's hands rested quietly in her lap, her posture perfectly straight. The answer was simple: dedication, determination, countless hours spent nurturing young minds. But she remained silent, her expression serene. "Miss Bennett," the judge continued, his voice sharpening, "you will answer the question when addressed by this court." In the gallery, Mary Thompson leaned forward, her scholarship letter clutched tightly in her hands. Sarah thought of the girl's journey, from a Shea freshman who doubted her abilities to a confident young scientist bound for Yale. That transformation needed no explanation or defense. "Your Honor," Sarah's attorney stood, "my client." Judge Morton waved him down. "Miss Bennett is capable of speaking for herself." He fixed his gaze on Sarah. "Tell the court about your teaching methods. How are you encouraging these students to pursue such ambitious goals?" The word ambitious hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's mind filled with images, Janet explaining complex chemical reactions to her classmates, Robert solving differential equations on the blackboard, Patricia leading the debate team to victory. Their achievements spoke volumes. Her silence would speak even louder. Miss Bennett, Judge Morton's knuckles whitened against his gavel. This court demands an answer. What exactly are you teaching these students? Sarah's eyes swept across the courtroom, taking in the familiar faces. Rebecca Johnson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. James Parker nodded almost imperceptibly. Dr. Eleanor Wright sat in the back row, her presence a reminder of generations of educators who had faced similar moments with unwavering dignity. Your Honor, the prosecuting attorney stepped forward. If Miss Bennett continues to refuse, I am giving you one final opportunity. Judge Morton interrupted, leaning forward. Explain your methods. Explain these results. Sarah's silence filled the courtroom like a symphony. She thought of her classroom walls covered with academic awards, of tearful parents at graduation ceremonies, of thank-you letters from former students now pursuing their dreams. No explanation was needed for excellence. No justification required for achievement. Judge Morton's face flushed red, the contrast stark against his white collar. Miss Bennett, your silence is contemptuous to this court. Do you understand the consequences of your continued defiance? A shaft of sunlight fell across Sarah's face, warming her skin. She remained still, her expression peaceful. In that moment, she taught her most powerful lesson, one of quiet strength, of unshakable dignity, of truth that needed no words to be heard. Very well. Judge Morton's voice cracked like thunder in the hushed chamber. This court finds you in contempt. You will be fined. But Sarah barely heard the amount. Her eyes found Mary in the gallery, tears streaming down the young girl's face, yet sitting tall and proud. In that moment, Sarah knew her silence had spoken volumes. She had shown her students that some principles were worth any price, that dignity couldn't be commanded, only chosen, and that true education went far beyond words in textbooks. The gavel fell, but Sarah remained unmoved, her silence a testimony more eloquent than any speech could have been. The words $500 fine echoed through the courtroom like thunder, but the slight smile that crossed Sarah Bennett's face puzzled Judge Morton. The amount represented nearly 4 months of her teaching salary, yet her expression held no trace of defeat. Instead, there was a quiet triumph in her eyes that the gavel's bang couldn't diminish. As she stood to leave the courtroom, Sarah's mind wandered to that morning's physics class. Thomas Jenkins, a usually quiet student, had finally grasped the concept of gravitational force. His eyes had lit up with understanding, and he'd explained it to his classmates with such clarity that Sarah had felt her heart swell with pride. That moment alone was worth more than any fine. Outside the courthouse steps, bright sunlight warmed her face. Dr. Eleanor Wright appeared at her side, umbrella in hand despite the clear sky. Your father would have been proud, she said softly. He always said that some lessons can't be taught with words. Sarah's thoughts drifted to the stack of college acceptance letters in her desk drawer. Jennifer Mason to Stanford, Robert Turner to MIT, Patricia Williams to Johns Hopkins. Each envelope represented countless hours of after-school tutoring, weekend study sessions, and unwavering belief in their potential. How could she put a price on those dreams? Miss Bennett, Miss Bennett, a familiar voice called out. Mary Thompson rushed down the courthouse steps, still clutching her Yale scholarship letter. Behind her came other students who had slipped out of school to attend the hearing. Their presence here, on a school day, spoke volumes about their dedication. You didn't say anything, Mary said, her voice filled with wonder rather than disappointment. Not a single word. Sarah adjusted her pearl necklace, a gesture that had become habit in moments of reflection. Some truths, Mary, don't need defending. Your achievements, all of your achievements, speak for themselves. Rebecca Johnson approached, her gradebook tucked under her arm like always. We'll find a way to handle the fine, she said firmly. The truth is, you've given us all something far more valuable than money today. Sarah watched as her students gathered around, their faces shining with a new understanding. In their eyes, she saw not just academic achievement, but the dawning recognition of their own worth, their own strength. Thomas pulled out his physics notebook, showing a classmate the problem he'd solved that morning. Even here, on the courthouse steps, learning continued. Later that afternoon, Sarah returned to her classroom. The fine would be difficult to pay, but as she looked at the wall of achievements, debate team trophies, science fair ribbons, mathematics Olympiad medals, she knew it was a small price for preserving something priceless: her students' dignity and determination. On her desk lay a stack of college application essays waiting to be reviewed. The top one began, "The most influential person in my life is my teacher, Miss Bennett, who taught me that excellence doesn't need permission, and that silence can be stronger than words." She sat down at her desk, taking out her red pen. The fine might empty her bank account, but it couldn't touch what really mattered: the fire of knowledge she'd ignited in young minds, the doors she'd helped open, the futures she'd helped shape. Outside her classroom window, the afternoon sun painted the sky in shades of possibility, and Sarah Bennett began to grade papers, her smile never wavering. A knock at the door revealed Principal Thompson. "The school board called," he said, his expression concerned but proud. "They wanted to know if you'd be willing to supervise the new advanced placement program." Sarah's smile deepened as she nodded. Some prices bought more than justice. They bought progress. The next morning, Sarah arrived at her classroom earlier than usual, her steps still echoing through Winchester High's empty halls. As she turned the corner, she stopped abruptly. Her classroom door was surrounded by flowers: roses, daisies, and lilies arranged in simple glass vases. The sweet fragrance filled the corridor, and amid the blooms sat a stack of carefully wrapped packages. Inside her classroom, more surprises awaited. On her desk sat a beautiful hand-sewn quilt, each patch containing messages of gratitude from her students. "Thank you for teaching us courage. Read one square." "Your silence spoke volumes," said another. The morning light streaming through the windows made the colors dance, and Sarah had to pause to collect herself. The first bell hadn't rung yet when Mary Thompson appeared at the door, carrying a poster board. "Miss Bennett, we have something to show you." Behind her, other students filed in, each carrying supplies. They quickly set up a display in the back of the classroom: photographs, newspaper clippings, and a large hand-drawn thermometer showing fundraising progress. "We're having a bake sale this weekend," Mary explained, her eyes bright with purpose. Patricia's mother offered her bakery kitchen, and Mrs. Johnson from the diner said we could set up tables there. She paused, straightening a photo of their winning science fair team. "We calculated that if everyone contributes what they can." Sarah's heart swelled as she watched more students arrive, each adding something to the growing display. James brought in flyers he'd designed on his father's typewriter. Lisa arrived with sign-up sheets for volunteer shifts. Even Quiet Thomas had contributed, using his newly mastered physics principles to calculate the optimal number of baked goods needed based on local foot traffic patterns. By mid-morning, word had spread beyond the school walls. Mr. Washington, the local pharmacist whose daughter had graduated from Sarah's class 3 years ago and was now in medical school, stopped by during her free period. "I remember when Caroline told me she wanted to be a doctor," he said, placing an envelope on her desk. "You were the first one who told her it wasn't just a dream." Throughout the day, more visitors arrived. Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store brought empanadas for the entire class and a promise to match whatever the bake sale raised. Dr. Marcus, whose son had recently been accepted to Howard University's engineering program, offered his office as another sales location. During lunch, Sarah discovered a stack of letters in her faculty mailbox. Former students wrote of their college experiences, their careers, their lives, each one tracing a path back to her classroom. One letter particularly caught her eye, from David Chen, class of '61. "When I defended my doctoral thesis last month, I thought of you, Miss Bennett. You taught us that excellence needs no explanation." After school, as Sarah graded papers, she heard music drifting down the hallway. Following the sound, she found her students in the music room, practicing for a benefit concert they'd organized. Angela Martinez, usually so shy about her violin playing, stood confidently leading the group through a complex piece. The music department at Yale has a wonderful chamber orchestra, Mary mentioned casually, adjusting her sheet music. I've been reading about their program. Her eyes met Sarah's, full of dreams that now seemed within reach. As twilight painted the sky outside, Sarah stood at her classroom window, watching students and parents work together, setting up for tomorrow's activities. The fine had been meant to silence her, but instead, it had amplified something far more powerful, the sound of a community rising together, the melody of progress that no court could quiet. 3 months passed like leaves turning in autumn, and now Sarah Bennett sat in Winchester High's auditorium, watching Mary Thompson adjust her valedictorian sash in the mirror backstage. The young woman's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her graduation gown, but her eyes shone with determination. "The speech is ready, Miss Bennett," Mary said, pulling out carefully typed pages. "I've practiced it 20 times, just like you taught us." Preparation eliminates hesitation. Sarah smiled, remembering countless debate team practices where she'd instilled that very principle. Now, scanning the audience through the curtain's gap, she noticed something remarkable. Among the usual proud parents and family members sat several distinguished-looking individuals, their presence marking a shift in the winds of change. Dr. Catherine Miller from Princeton's physics department had arrived early, having read Mary's brilliant research paper on molecular structures. Dean Anderson from Howard University's medical school sat nearby, his interest piqued by the exceptional test scores coming from Winchester's science program. Even Mr. Harrison, the state's education board director, had made an appearance, though his expression suggested he was still processing the events of the past few months. The ceremony began with Principal Thompson's opening remarks. "This year," he announced, his voice carrying clear across the auditorium, "Winchester High School has achieved unprecedented academic success. Our students have received over $1 million in scholarship offers. They'd broken state records in mathematics, sciences, and debate." Sarah watched from the side as Mary approached the podium. The young woman stood tall, her posture reflecting months of practice presentations in Sarah's classroom. The silence before she spoke held the same power that Sarah had wielded in the courtroom. "Education," Mary began, her voice steady and strong, "is not just about learning facts. It's about discovering who you can become." She paused, her eyes finding Sarah's. "This year, we learned our most important lesson not from a textbook, but from a teacher who showed us that dignity doesn't bow to pressure, that excellence needs no defense, and that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that chooses silence." In the audience, Sarah noticed Dr. Eleanor Wright dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Beside her sat Thomas Jenkins, home from his first semester at MIT, and Angela Martinez, recently accepted to Juilliard's music program. Their presence represented a growing cascade of achievement that no fine could diminish. After the ceremony, as families celebrated with cameras flashing, Dr. Miller approached Sarah. "Miss Bennett, I've been following your students' achievements with great interest. We're developing a new outreach program for promising young scientists. Would you be willing to serve as a consultant?" Before Sarah could respond, Dean Anderson joined them. "I'd like to discuss your teaching methods as well. The critical thinking skills your students demonstrate are exactly what we're looking for in medical school candidates." Mary appeared at Sarah's side, still clutching her diploma. A reporter from the local paper followed, asking about her Yale scholarship and future plans. But Mary's response captured perfectly what Sarah had taught them all. "Success isn't about proving others wrong," she said, her voice clear and confident. "It's about proving yourself right. Miss Bennett taught us that excellence doesn't ask permission, it simply perseveres." As the summer evening settled over the school grounds, Sarah watched her students scatter like seeds in the wind, each carrying with them the potential to bloom in new soil. The fine she paid had indeed opened doors, not just for one generation, but for all those who would follow. Dean Anderson's voice broke through her thoughts. "Miss Bennett, would you join us for dinner? We'd love to hear more about your advanced science curriculum." Sarah smiled, adjusting her pearl necklace. Some victories, she realized, came disguised as challenges, and some silences spoke louder than any words ever could. 20 years later, Sarah Bennett stood in the gleaming lobby of Winchester High's new science wing, her silver-streaked hair elegantly styled for the occasion. The space buzzed with energy as former students, now accomplished professionals, gathered for a special ceremony. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the wall of achievements that told 2 decades of progress. Mary Thompson, now Dr. Thompson and head of biochemistry at Yale, approached the podium. Her presence commanded attention, just as it had on her graduation day. Behind her stood a diverse group of Sarah's former students, surgeons, professors, engineers, and educators, each carrying forward the torch of excellence she had lit. "We gather today," Mary began, her voice carrying the same clear confidence she'd developed in Sarah's classroom, "to announce the establishment of the Sarah Bennett Excellence in Education Fund. But more than that, we're here to celebrate a moment that changed all our lives. A silence that spoke volumes." Sarah's eyes swept across the audience, recognizing faces that had once looked up at her from classroom desks. Thomas Jenkins, now a NASA engineer, sat beside Angela Martinez, concert violinist and music professor. Robert Turner, a pioneering heart surgeon, smiled from the front row, his own daughter now a student at Winchester. "The fund," Mary continued, "will provide scholarships to students who demonstrate not just academic potential, but the courage to pursue excellence against all odds. It will support teacher training programs that embrace Miss Bennett's methods of fostering critical thinking and unwavering dignity." Principal Thompson, now Superintendent Thompson, stepped forward with a plaque. The bronze surface caught the light, engraved with words that made Sarah's heart swell. "The Sarah Bennett Science Center, where silence speaks and excellence soars." Dr. Eleanor Wright, now in her 80s but still radiating wisdom, touched Sarah's hand. "Look around," she whispered. "This is what courage looks like 20 years later." Indeed, the evidence was everywhere. The walls displayed photographs of student achievements through the years, science fair victories, debate championships, graduation ceremonies. But more telling were the faces in the room, generations of students who had gone on to break barriers and open doors for others. Lisa Chen, class of '75, now a federal judge, stepped up to share her story. "In law school, when challenges seemed overwhelming, I remembered Miss Bennett's lesson. Dignity doesn't require defense. Excellence speaks for itself." As the ceremony continued, Sarah noticed a group of current Winchester students watching from the doorway, their eyes wide with wonder. They wore the same look of possibility she had nurtured in their predecessors, the recognition that they too could reach for dreams that seemed beyond horizon. After the formal presentations, Sarah found herself surrounded by former students, each sharing how that pivotal moment had shaped their lives. "When I defended my doctoral thesis, during my first surgery, as I stood before the Supreme Court," each story began differently but carried the same thread. Courage learned in a classroom where excellence knew no bounds. David Chen, the quantum physicist, approached with his young daughter. "Tell her the story, Miss Bennett," he said softly. "Tell her about the day silence won." Sarah smiled, touching her pearl necklace, the same one she'd worn that day in court. But before she could speak, Mary returned to the podium, holding up a familiar document, the court record from that day, now preserved in the city's historical archives. "The fine was $500, Mary announced, "but the return on that investment is beyond measure. Today, we announce that the Sarah Bennett Fund will begin with a $5 million endowment, ensuring that courage and excellence will continue to find a home at Winchester High." As applause filled the room, Sarah looked out at the faces before her, past, present, and future intertwined in a legacy that would continue to grow. The price of silence had indeed been paid, but its dividends would echo through generations to come.